Welcome to the TELSIG podcast. This is Phil Martin from the University of York. I'm joined today by Joe Dale, who's a TELSIG familiar. Thanks for coming back on the show, Joe. How's it going?
Oh, you're absolutely welcome. Can't wait to start talking all about AI and language learning and language teaching. So when I had the opportunity of coming on the podcast, as you know, I'm a big fan of podcasts. I jumped at the chance.
Yeah, no worries. Well, let's try and do it justice. I mean, we've linked to your talk that you gave, when was that? It must have been about 18 months ago now. You gave a TELSIG webinar on using current technological tools in language teaching. I don't think it was actually AI dominated, that talk, was it? I think
it wasn't. It was to do with accessibility. But I also did a webinar through Lucia Aiello on ChatGPT through University of York, which is also really, really popular, which I think was last year as well. It all sort of blurs into one, really, in a way. But that's right. I did come on the TELSIG podcast or the TELSIG webinar series and talked about accessibility, things like immersive reader and voice typing, things like that.
Brilliant. Okay. We'll segue into AI today and just get a sort of snapshot of the technological status and see where everyth's at. Because I put your full bio in the show notes below, so we'll do a brief introduction in a minute and you can direct us there to any links or things that we talk about. But you're a freelance language trainer, I guess. You're not really a teacher, you're a trainer and you do a lot of CPD, and you are what they call scanning the horizon for new technologies a lot of the time and sort of disseminating that. So where are we at the moment with the state of AI in language teaching? I know you're running a course on this at the moment, so we'll link to that and don't want to encroach on your livelihood too far in this podcast. So, it's not a substitute for signing up for the course, but just give us a snapshot of the state of AI in language teaching. What are teachers using it for and what are learners using it for?
First and foremost, I sort of regard myself as an independent languages consultant. I am mostly making a living through training, but I do consultancy as well. I am a former languages teacher for those people that don't know. So I did teach French for 13 years, 3 years at secondary school level and 10 years at middle school level. I've been interested in how technology can enhance language learning for well over 20 years now. But as we all know, in the last couple of years, the interest has all been around the use of AI. And as normal, I became an early adopter pretty quickly to the start of 2023, started putting together training and courses and things like that. But the impression that I have had since starting looking at AI is that still many teachers, they may have heard of, for example, ChatGPT, but they haven't really dabbled that much. I mean, you have some teachers that have maybe created a lesson plan or created a text or this sort of thing, or maybe a multiple choice quiz. But I think the vast majority still either haven't dabbled at all, or maybe aren't even interested, maybe through fear or what have you, or just don't want to get into trouble with their school or with their districts or anything like that, really. So I think the place where we're at the moment, you've got the early adopters. And when I ran my first webinar series in May 2023, and then I repeated it in June and then January 2024, and nearly 300 teachers from around the world have taken that course, I think a lot of those were early adopters. And that's the impression that I got. And I think they were just really, looking at ways in which you could use, for example, to start off with ChatGPT. And I just spent a lot of time, as I normally do, researching and watching YouTube clips and listening to podcasts and reading posts on LinkedIn and Twitter X and Facebook and what have you, trying to learn as much as possible, but then apply, if you like, a language teaching lens on that and see how it could be adapted, particularly for saving teachers time, which is the majority of the content which I'm presenting about at the moment, is suggesting on how teachers can use AI to save time for streamlining their workflow, as well as some ideas around how students can use AI. But there's such an issue around things like age restrictions and privacy and making sure that you adhere to your school AI policy, or maybe for those listeners in the UK, the UK policy from the government on the use of AI and having to be 13 or above and have parental permission. So I think it's more problematic. But of course, any teacher wanting to use AI with students need to be sure that they check the terms and conditions and the privacy policy of each individual tool that you want to use. But just in the case of ChatGPT, if students want to use ChatGPT, then they need to have an account, they need to be 13 or above, and they need to have a mobile phone in order to receive the code in order to set their account up. So there's more issues around the student use of AI, but most of the work I've been doing is supporting teachers. And as you know, I've created a Facebook group, Language Teaching with AI, which has already got over 5,000 members. And a lot of those people are really just looking for ideas. I have some questions at the beginning for people to join, membership questions. And most people just say, I'm new to this. I just want to learn and find out more. Some people have been saying, I've been using this for a while. I've been doing X, Y, and Z. But I would say the majority of teachers who request to join are really at the beginning of their journey, as it were. So I'm more than happy to hold their hand along that journey and see where we come.
Yeah. So I think on the point of teachers having quite a broad spectrum of experience, when you talk to teachers, although we've been flooded with ChatGPT, what do you call it? Memes, airways, advice, apps, training sessions and everything. There's still a lot of people who are completely understandably haven't had time to check it out, haven't maybe even logged on. And I don't think that's necessarily surprising. So I've run a couple of training sessions locally here in the university for teachers. And it's not, we shouldn't really be surprised. I think those of us who play around with AI and have we're trying out new tools and we carve out time in the working week, more power to you if you can do that. But a lot of people simply don't have time. And also, I think there's an issue around, certainly in higher education, we get policies that are kind of vaguely worded. I think there's issues around accessibility, as you touched on there, in the sense that we might have some institutional access, but there is, with the sheer amount of apps available and things that we're being asked to experiment with, this is dependent as well on people sort of logging in with their own credentials a lot of the time and setting up accounts. So all of these things are little barriers which do get in the way of just dabbling with this stuff every now and again, which is kind of what you need to do. So I think for anyone listening to this who, if you're in this category, you just haven't had a chance and you do feel like you're falling behind a little bit, I think one of the first applications that few teachers that I was working with, we saw with ChatGPT, if you're into language teaching, was the ability to very quickly generate exemplar texts. So you might want to illustrate a particular language point. You might want to pitch a short text at a level of, let's say, B1 students on the CEFR and only include words from, a certain section of the academic word list. These are the things that ChatGPT can do quite neatly and quite quickly. Being able to quickly create texts gives you the example to do things like gap fills and stuff like that. This was quite early on. Is that a place where you'd recommend people start at, or are you, with your training sessions, are you jumping in at a slightly different point?
So in the first series, that's exactly what I was doing. I was demonstrating, for example, how you could create a short text of, say, 100 words, and how you could then ask ChatGPT to turn that into a gap fill, but it wasn't necessarily as precise as you wanted it to be. For example, it can certainly make gaps in the text, no problem at all, but it's not necessarily consistent. Sometimes it might give underscores, or it might give numbers, or sometimes both. If you were to say, remove all the verbs and replace them with gaps, it would maybe remove some verbs, but not all the verbs, or it might remove some words which are nouns, etc. So on that sort of very analytical, grammatical focus, it can fall down. So what I tend to do is I tend to say, get it to create fictional text, which it does really, really well, as you said, and you can certainly use the CFR levels as a guide, but then maybe copy and paste that content into another tool, such as WordWall or Learning Apps, and then add the gap fill functionality in one of those tools. And in that way, you have complete control over the gaps that you choose. And it's easy to go down a rabbit hole, I think, if you're not careful, trying to get ChatGPT to do exactly what it is that you want it to do. And actually, it's quicker to play to its strengths, e.g. to create text at different levels, and then to use another tool to then turn it into a gap fill. I think that's really important. In relation to vocabulary and particular items, yes, I agree that if you, for example, have 10 or 20 words that you want to say, make sure that you include this within the text, it can handle that very well. If you have many, many more than that, it probably will hallucinate. Recently, Diffit, which is a really nice sort of entry tool for people to use, not only in languages, but across the curriculum. And what it allows you to do is create different graded versions of different topics. So you can ask it to generate a topic on, for example, the environment. You can choose different languages that it's going to then produce that summary in. It's going to create multiple choice questions, open-ended questions, summaries. And one particular item I particularly like is vocabulary, with the items of vocabulary in context, in sentences, which is really nice. And you can also take a YouTube clip, and you can, as long as the YouTube clip has a transcript, you can also generate similar types of text based on that YouTube clip. But one of the recent updates they've added is particular vocabulary items. So you can put in, for example, 10 items in a chronological list, and then it will then generate a text which should then include those 10 items. So in the context of the new GCSE in England, it's the first time that we've had exam boards, AQA and EdXL, who have produced slightly different vocabulary lists that we have to adhere to as much as possible in order to make the text as comprehensible and as relevant as possible. And one tool that I've been using recently from the University of York is the multi-link profiler. So you can generate text in, for example, ChatGPT, and then put it into the multi-link profiler, and then it will tell you how many of those words in that text appear on either the AQA or the EdXL vocabulary list, which obviously people planning for the new GCSE, that's exactly what they want to be able to do. And when I've done this, I may get, say, 75% of the words which are in those exam board lists appearing in the text. But what you then have to do is you then have to maybe find a kind person that's organized those vocab lists into different themes, which is going to save you a lot of time. And that's exactly what I did in relation to a talk that I saw at Language World, which is the conference organized by the Association for Language Learning. And I saw a talk by Wendy Adeniji, who had done exactly that. She had organized the different vocabulary lists from AQA and EdXL into different themes. And she also gave the talk at the Language Show, which, as we all know, is now online, and all the recordings of the different sessions on their YouTube channel. And so what I was able to do is I was able to go to a particular topic, which I think was sport and leisure, if I remember correctly, when Wendy was talking about in the YouTube recording that was made of her talk. And I was able to copy those words using a simple sort of screenshot, and then I used the app called PhotoScan, which is available on the Microsoft App Store, and I was able to OCR the screenshot, extract the text from the different items on her screen, and then put those into ChatGPT. And I said, could you rewrite this text using these 10, 20 words? I then copied and pasted the results into the multi-link profiler, and suddenly it gave me 98% of mapped words in, I think it was AQA. So that's what I would recommend for those people looking for a solution using AI to try and include as many of the words from those exam board lists into your text and your content you're going to be using for planning for the new GCSE. So there we are.
Who are your main target audience with regards to people who are training at the moment? So we're talking about schools at the moment. We've obviously worked a lot with higher education teachers as well. Presumably you're dealing with a lot of freelancers who also might not have institutional access to products. So who are you looking at, and what do they generally have access to when you're running these sessions?
So the bread and butter of the people who I work with are language teachers, modern foreign language teachers, not only from the UK, but literally all over the world. I've got, for example, 34,000 followers on Twitter, 3,500 subscribers on YouTube, similar number on LinkedIn. There's 5,000 people in the Facebook group, etc. So I would say that the majority of people who connect with me are modern foreign language teachers, although there are a lot of EFL teachers as well. And in relation to other consultants, certainly I've been learning a lot from other consultants who are also interested in this same area. And I think that in general, not just to do with AI, but EdTech in general, there's very much a sharing sensibility, I think, in the community. And you can pick up so much from each other. And then sometimes I'll even, direct message someone, like a friend, for example, say, oh, I don't suppose you could send me the link to that webinar that you did yesterday, or I'm trying this out, what do you think? Or sometimes I have friends that I will send a presentation to before I go live with it and just say, could you just have a quick look at this? Does this look okay, as it were? And I think, particularly because I've been in the game for a long time now, I sort of built up this, really nice community of people who I trust and I can share ideas with. And that's really valuable and useful, I think. So I do some work with people in higher education, but the vast majority of the things that I do tend to be aimed at secondary school teachers, but literally from all over the world. Okay.
So when you're trying to get people on board with some of these platforms, so you went through quite a few platforms there when you were talking about your last answer. We've now got the ability now to sort of take text from screenshots, graphics, mix things together. We can really harness these AI-powered tools to do a lot for us. But one of the things that we've got there is, what's the word I'm looking for? Like a broad desktop of tools that we need to sort of place together. It's sort of like musician's pedal board. You have to kind of make everything link up together. I think that takes a bit of time to know how, which platforms to use with which. And then you've got the issue of access there as well. So with all of these things, when they're new on the scene, they've got a bit of free access. But as soon as AI becomes involved, this is quite expensive. It will be free for a little bit, then they'll probably tighten up. So how do you navigate that with your students, with people attending your sessions? How do you kind of like make sure that they're on the platforms that you need to be on to run the training sessions? Presumably you're getting a lot of hands-on practice in these sessions as well, and you want to sort of learn by doing. So what do you get them to sign up to? What's free, and what's a good place for people to start?
Okay, well, my experience is that most teachers, if not all teachers, want to not pay for educational technology. But as you say, with AI, there is a cost involved with the companies, because every time you put in a prompt, you have to pay for the tokens that the API is generating as a result of the prompt, and therefore that's costing you money. So if you have a completely free tool, unless you're a big company like Microsoft or Google, then that's not a model which is going to survive. In relation to workflow, I mean, I'm a big fan of app smashing, which is a term which I first heard about in about 2013, I think it was. And at the time when I was really into iPads and the idea of app smashing, in other words, working out a workflow whereby you would create a multimedia outcome by going through a workflow of creating content using a variety of different apps, but in a certain order. And through that process, you could then, and different iterations, you could then create something that was really quite fun and exciting. And I think that with AI, I think that's exactly right, that you have to work out your own workflow. So I just talked about a workflow in relation to screenshotting a YouTube clip, extracting the text, which you can actually do natively in ChatGPT as well, using what's called vision. AI, ChatGPT, etc., can now read text which is in an image. So you could take a screenshot, download it, or use a tool like Snip and Sketch, which is bundled with Windows, to take a screenshot that you can then save to your desktop, for example, upload it to ChatGPT, and then tell ChatGPT to extract the text. Or in some cases, if, for example, if you have an image of a sentence builder, which are very popular at the moment in secondary schools in particular, you can upload the image of a sentence builder and then say, could you now create 10 sentences extracting words from the sentence builder? And it can do that really, really well. So I think through the process of my training sessions, my webinars, my hands-on courses, what I tend to do is I tend to demonstrate an idea. I then give people the opportunity to have a play, give me feedback, etc. Sometimes if I'm just doing sort of like a straight recording, so for example, in the case of the webinar series that I'm doing now, I'm essentially talking for 90 minutes, but I'm having the interaction with everyone through the chat. But I'm not giving people, say, 10 minutes to have a go themselves. I'm simply demonstrating each idea and then moving on, but getting interaction with everyone in the chat. And normally the feedback is incredibly positive, which I'm obviously delighted about. Whereas in other sessions, if it's, for example, a 3-hour session, which I've done many times before, then I would absolutely pause the recording, give people an opportunity to have a play, have a break halfway through, etc., etc. But it really depends on what I'm trying to achieve. But I find that what people seem to really like in my sessions is how practical they are and how I make it really clear what you can use for free and what you have to pay for. And people normally say, well, you know, with Padlet, for example, which is a tool I've been talking about a lot recently because of the new AI features that the team have added, or AI recipes to use their exact term, you can only make 3 Padlets with the free version. But if you had existing Padlets, when they made that change from completely free to the freemium model, they didn't delete the Padlets you already had. And because I've been using Padlet for many, many years at that point, I had about 220 Padlets, which I could then just go back to and repurpose, and ones I hadn't used for, say, you know, a few years, and that was absolutely fine. But that's one of the key things. Teachers always want to know what is free, what is not free. Is it GDPR compliant? How easy is it to onboard the students if it's a tool designed to be used with students? Do you need an email address or a QR code or a link? All those sorts of issues are incredibly important. And I talk about those a lot when I'm particularly doing, for example, promotional webinars with, say, a company. I'll get in contact with a company and I would say, you know, would you be interested in doing an hour-long webinar talking about your product, your tool, etc.? And then people then come along for free. And it's a bit like, you know, the footfall of, say, a conference session, whereby the company would hire a table, for example, and then show off their product. It's the same sort of thing, but through a webinar. And as a result of that, it means that the audience can then ask lots and lots of questions, and the presenter can then go through and answer any questions that may come up. And that seems to work really well. But one of the things I say at the beginning when I'm having sort of like the pre-talk about or setting up the webinar and how it's all going to work, I say, well, some of the things that teachers always want to know about is what can you do for free with the product? Is it GDPR compliant? and how easy it is to onboard, and do the students need to share personal identifiable information such as an email address, etc. And so those sorts of things are really key. So again, because I'm sort of very experienced in this, because of the amount of work and research that I've done, I am able to, as much as possible, answer those sorts of questions. And if there's a question which I don't know the answer to, I normally go to Perplexity AI, and I put in a search, and it will then give me the answer straight away. So I think for factual information, I prefer to use Perplexity. For fictional information, I prefer to use ChatGPT or Claude. I'm a big fan of Claude for writing succinctly as well, which I really like as well.
Yeah, so I'll ask you about Perplexity in a sec, because so you've raised three very valid points there. So, what's free, what's GDPR compliant, and what was the third one?
The personal identifiable information. What personal identifiable information do the students have to give up to use the tool, if the tool is aimed to be used for students? Yeah,
right. That was the other one I was thinking of. So let's focus at the moment on teachers who are simply prepping a lesson, for example. So we'll take out of the equation whether learners don't need access. We do this in higher ed sometimes. So we're starting at the moment, I'm trying to get students to, play around with these tools and see what they can do. But let's remove that, because that's when it gets a little bit messy. They're not uploading any of their own data. I'm going to use a free tool that I found as a placeholder. I'll talk about ChatGPT, and I'm going to generate some texts and just some classroom material that I can then use in my classes. So I can distribute it. There's no copyright issues. There's no GDPR. I'm not involving assessments. So I'm certainly not storing anything. So I'm keeping it pretty simple there. Just give us an idea at the moment, what's the best place to start? Because we're broadcasting at the moment in November 2024. So this is, true as of the time of recording. Let's start with ChatGPT. What can we do there at the moment? Is that still as free as it has been, or is it sort of more limited now than it was? Can teachers basically get started with ChatGPT tomorrow?
Absolutely. They can get started with ChatGPT as tomorrow, but what they need to think about really is in relation to the number of messages they send in a certain period of time, let's say in an hour, in a couple of hours, because with the latest model, or one of the latest models, should I say, because the latest model is O1, which is supposed to be better with things like reasoning skills and mathematics, things like that, which a lot of people sort of talk about the fact that ChatGPT is not very good at, for example, counting the number of R's in strawberry, for example, things like that. That's been that classic meme I'm sure you've seen recently. And with 01, which is slower but better at reasoning, apparently it's much better at mathematical problems. But for languages, which is what we're focusing on here, then the free version you can get at the moment is the same as one of the models you can get with the premium version, which is 4O, the O standing for Omni. And essentially, you've got more or less the same access to different features, such as vision, such as being able to upload content via the attachment option. Recently, they've added web search as well, which I presume is available in the free version as well. It's just the difference is that you're limited with the number of messages you can send within a certain period of time. And so when I'm doing, for example, face-to-face training course, I've been doing some in Dublin recently, people will say, oh, I've reached the limit of what I can do for free. And then they have to go down to a slower model, which is fine. And that's just the way that it works. So one interesting example of this recently in relation to, as I was saying earlier, that lots of teachers are sort of, dipping their toes in maybe writing a lesson plan or a resource, is that I saw a really interesting idea, I thought, a really simple idea, but a really interesting idea from a webinar I watched recently from the digital skills team from North Carolina in the States. And they have a YouTube channel which has lots of webinars that they freely make available. And I saw a really interesting one to do with storytelling in English. And the idea was, it was a bit like a Mad Lib in the sense that you had a Google Doc and you had different drop-down menus in the Google Doc, which would then give you different choices, for example, a different noun or a different adjective or a different verb. And as a result of that, you would make different choices to create the prompt, and then you would copy and paste the prompt into a large language model such as ChatGPT, etc., and it would then generate a story for you. And I thought, oh, that's an interesting idea. So I'm constantly magpieing ideas. And one person I remember, Carla Arena from Brazil, described this as being a digital archaeologist, looking for gems on the internet, which I just love. And so I thought that's a good idea. So I then went into Google Docs and I played around with going to the insert menu and the drop-down option and then adding different drop-downs. And I made a template for creating either a lesson plan or a worksheet. So I just put in different parameters, such as the idea of asking the LLM to play a role. So you are and then I had experienced French teacher, Spanish teacher, German teacher, Japanese teacher, etc. I want to create a lesson plan or a worksheet. My students are, and then you have the age of the students. They're working at A1, A2, B1, B2, C1, C2. I need a lesson on, or whatever it might be. And then I would put 3 dots there, and then people would then fill in that information, and so on and so forth. And then the idea is once you've made those different choices, you would then copy the results by just dragging over everything, copying it, and then pasting it into the large language model. And what I did was I made a version which was view only, but I also made a version which was a forced copy, which meant that people could just click on make a copy and then they'd have their own version. And I shared that on various places, but just on LinkedIn, for example, it had over 250 likes. So it just shows how people are constantly looking for new ideas to streamline their workflow in the use of AI. And that was obviously one that resonated with people. So I think having some sort of scaffold to help people with prompt engineering is obviously a really valuable and good thing to do, because I think there are lots of people who maybe just don't know how to write a prompt, and it does take a bit of skill. I also use the prepared framework as well from Dan Fitzpatrick, which I find really useful as well, where each letter refers to a different aspect or lever, as he describes them, to make your prompts better. And one of the fun ones, the E, is emotion. So I watched a webinar that he did recently, which I've actually written up in great detail in my Facebook group. And the E stands for emotion, as I said. So he was saying if you use a phrase like, my job depends upon it, then supposedly the large language model will be more efficient in its answer, which is just quite fun to do anyway. And that normally goes down well in training sessions when I say, you have to say, my job depends upon it to make your prompt more effective.
Yeah, I mean, I was going to ask you about prompt engineering because I think this is one thing on my list here, and obviously it's something we need to address. I'll just, let's just touch on that now, because I think, again, just bearing in mind, we're really thinking of people who are just getting started with this, who haven't dipped a toe in yet. There are a few things, I think, if you have been using these tools for some time, that you forget you very quickly. The learning curve is so steep that it's very easy to imagine what it was like. So I know, especially with a chatbot type tool like ChatGPT, and you're told, well, this will save you time and this can do anything. You'll be blown away by how. And you just have to ask it something, and it's very easy to come up with a blank. So prompt guides, there are quite a few on the internet that you can. I think Sheffield's Prompt Bank is a great resource that you can use, and it will give you some ideas of how to write decent prompts. And I think a couple of things worth mentioning here is it's quite interesting how these large language models respond very well to things like adjectives. Yeah, like my job depends on it. Right, there's not something I would think to put in there. But sure, why not? We'll play around with that and just put in colourful adjectives which might add some flair to the responses that it spits out. And I think work with some frameworks and give yourself some templates to work with. And we'll link to some of these in the show notes as well. I'm sure you've got a few that are useful. But also the trick of, I think people who are new to this sometimes treat the dialogue box of ChatGPT like a Google search engine, because that's kind of what the closest thing that you're used to. So you might say, give me a text on, what's a topical example? Not about the US election.
Climate change. What about climate change?
Yeah, right. Give me a text on climate change. And it will give you something, because your prompt is not particularly detailed, it might be very broad. It's going to give you something that you might be initially underwhelmed at. So you'll be like, oh, that's factually inaccurate and not the kind of thing I'm looking for. And you immediately discard it. So I think one of the things to bear in mind is it's not a Google search engine. This is a sort of a conversation partner, and you refine the output. So you chat to it and you can say, yeah, that's kind of what I'm looking for, but more in this direction. Add a few more bits of this language. Can you write it in the style of The Economist? So have a go with these and really try and get into an iterative cycle with these prompts. So I think flair with the prompts, using some of these frameworks and ideas and catalogs, and also just treating it as a conversation. And then obviously you can save these conversations and revisit them as well. And you pull out, old materials and think, I used this last week, but please tweak that. So these are all great. What would you add to that list of people who are just faced with a ChatGPT dialogue box for the first time and need to help it plan the lesson? Are there any more sort of tips along those lines that could guide them and not, make them sort of persevere with it for a little while?
Absolutely. I think the old adage of, garbage in, garbage out is very true here. In other words, the more general the prompt that you write, the more general the response that you're going to get. And I could imagine how that would be underwhelming, as you say, to people. But for example, if you were to say the age of the students, if you were to say the context, maybe if they're in England or whichever country they may be in, maybe the curriculum that they're following, maybe the language you want the text to be in. If you have, let's say, students with special educational needs and that you want to cater for everyone in the class and you want ChatGPT to suggest strategies, I think those are a few levers, I think, which are really useful. I think the idea of looking at different examples that other institutions have made, as you say, there are different examples which are readily available that people can check out. That's also a really useful model to help people get an idea of what it is that is best to include within different prompts. I think that's fantastic. But in general, I think having that sort of conversational approach that you've just said, that's something that I've picked up from various people I've listened to, that seems to be the preferred model, not to try and expect that you're going to have like a one-shot prompt, as it were. In other words, you put in one prompt and you expect the results to be perfect, but have this sort of iterative conversation with the AI in order to get exactly what it is that you want. But the more information you give, the more accurate it will be. And one of the ideas that Dan Fitzpatrick talks about is the idea of asking the large language model to ask you questions about the prior learning of the students, which I think is a really good idea. And so by asking the AI to do that, and then you obviously answering the different questions, then the AI is able to establish more precisely the sort of context where the students are finding themselves, because obviously it doesn't know the context of the students. You have to tell the AI what the context is, and the more precise you are, the better the outcome can be that the AI then produces. So I think that's a really interesting idea, and I think that, well, personally, I find that frameworks have just been really useful for me in working out the best way of prompting as a way of, getting what I want. Because really what you don't want to be doing, you don't want to be saying, oh yeah, AI is fantastic, it's going to save you lots of time. And then people just get stuck and don't know where to start. And it's actually sending them down a rabbit hole. And that's exactly what you don't want. But sometimes that can happen. And you have to be, aware of the fact that maybe you're going down a rabbit hole. In other words, particularly in relation to images, when you're asking AI to produce a particular image, and it can be easily the case that it just can't do certain things. If you try to be too descriptive in the image, it just can't do it necessarily. If you say, for example, I want such and such an item to be a certain color, sometimes it just can't do that because of the data set which has been fed into it. It just doesn't recognize necessarily how it can make those little tweaks. There are AI tools out there, such as Adobe Firefly, which make it easy to adjust elements of an image. But in general, I suggest with a tool like Padlet, with the I can't draw feature, which is wonderful and can be used with students because of the fact that it's an educational tool, etc., and the privacy terms and the terms and conditions make it okay for students to use a tool like Padlet, that you would get to create the image first and then describe that in the target language rather than the other way around. So that way, once you've got the image first of all, then it's going to be a lot easier to generate a good quality description of that image, as opposed to doing it the other way around. If you're trying, forever to create different types of image based on exactly the text you've written, you could easily be going down a rabbit hole, which is something that none of us have time for. So I think through experience, as with anything to do with educational technology, you feel more confident with its use and you work out the things which it can do well and the things that it can't do as well. And therefore, I'm not so surprised now when things go wrong, in inverted commas, or the AI hallucinates, because it's probably down to the fact that either it just can't do certain things or that I haven't written the prompt in the right way. And that's just fascinating. And I see it like a playground, as it were. I enjoy experimenting, but I appreciate not everyone has time to do that. But again, I think one of the beauties of putting together an online course is the fact that you can have that as a shortcut for people who are too busy to do this themselves, and they could just sort of come along and then be blown away by all the possibilities of what you can do with AI.
Yeah, I've been cautious so far to sort of sell to people that they're going to be blown away, because it does, it sort of skirts around the fact that this is something that you need to work at a little bit. You need to be prepared to invest even 20 minutes a week. If you can do 20 minutes on Friday morning, playing around with some of the free packaging, which is easier said than done. I know it's very easy to say. Everything in the world seems to be promising huge returns for just 10 minutes of your time a day. You've got, Duolingo, and I'm not spending enough time on my instrument learning or whatever it is we've got. So I know how hard it is for people, even when you say 10 minutes a day or whatever, but it really is, I think, time well spent, because it is something that you get if you're creating materials as a teacher or a learning designer, then this is something that you can get that time back in spades, really, once you've mastered a few of these techniques and just spent some time analyzing the kind of responses it gives back to you and seeing what prompts work, as you say. I think that's all, really worthwhile. I think one of the things I wanted to touch on as well is if we're talking about language teaching, even if we're not directly involving students, we're perhaps not getting them on platforms in class and getting them doing their own things. Let's say we're doing our own materials and we're using AI to help us create a more or less traditional language teaching class that we would have done perhaps 10 years ago, just guided language exposure and things like that. What do we need to be mindful of about how language learning has changed generally? Because students, obviously, we're not going to assume that they've got access to all these platforms, but they undoubtedly will have. We've seen, the rise of AI-powered machine translation and all these other things, which have fundamentally changed how people interact with different languages, how they learn different languages. In some ways, people who are slightly more instrumentally motivated will have that leg up. It can sometimes make our jobs a little bit difficult. But what's your take on this? What's been your experience? I don't know how much direct language teaching you still do, but what's your sense of adjustments that we as teachers should be making to the way we expect students to engage with languages now?
Yeah, great question. So obviously I'm not teaching languages right now. I haven't been teaching languages for a number of years as a result of being a consultant, but I'm certainly working with language teachers on a regular daily basis. But I think that going back to the comment you made a moment ago, which, is this just like 10 years ago with the use of educational technology, to summarize what you were saying, I think that there are, as I mentioned at the beginning, there are tools which can be used amongst students. For example, Mizou is a really nice tool for practicing conversation, which always goes down well when I'm presenting it in different webinars. And what's lovely about that is the way in which you can, as a teacher, create an educational chatbot. It's GDPR compliant. You put in your prompt, you say the sort of chatbot you want to create. And the examples I normally give, I normally say, you are Pierre, a French waiter in a French cafe. So giving the chatbot a role, giving some parameters, saying my students will order food and drink from you. They are working at A1 level French. Always respond in short, simple sentences and be kind and polite. And then you then generate this chatbot. It generates a link. You share the link with the students. The only personal identifiable information they need to put in is their name, which could be a nickname or a code or what have you. And then they can then interact with that chatbot simply and easily as a way of practicing their speaking skills. And I generally, love this idea, having been in this sort of game for well over 20 years. I think that the way in which we can use AI in that way, in a moderated environment, we can encourage the children to be more confident in their speaking, to practice maybe at home or on the bus or when they're going for a walk or whatever it might be, in relation to new modes of learning, for example. I think that's really, really exciting. But I think one of the key issues around using AI in schools, as I sort of alluded to already, is the fact that we need to make sure that we stick and adhere to the AI policy of the school, of the country, etc. And I think some teachers are worried about that and think they might get into trouble if they use AI and it's not, an appropriate use of AI, let's say. But I think with tools like Mizou, also with Audio Pen, which you don't even need to have a login for, and you can just speak into Audio Pen, have your unstructured thoughts turned into really nice, clear summaries in a range of languages. You can choose the input language and the output language. And you can, for example, choose French and French or English and French, or if you have EAL students, they could be choosing their first language and then having the output language as English, for example. If they don't have a good command of English, they could use a tool like that to help them. But I think that there are lots of ways in which you can use AI as a student, but I think that we just need to make sure that we adhere to the AI policy of the school and to the country. And because this is all so new, I think the technology is far ahead of the legislation. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, but because it can be, if you bring in legislation too quickly, that it's not sort of fit for purpose and it's almost like a knee-jerk reaction to the AI. But there's certainly been, many, many teachers speaking to me with their concerns about what do you do if you feel that students are just using ChatGPT and not thinking about their homework. They're just generating a response in ChatGPT, handing it in, and then how do you deal with that? And I sort of, give my stock responses to that normally. But I think that I think it's a challenging situation for everyone really at the moment. And by having people like myself who are trying to steady the water and find practical solutions that work in different contexts, I think is the way forward. And that will then build confidence and give people a pathway to explore in order to give them some good ideas on how they can use AI in a practical and responsible way, not only for themselves to save time, but also for students as well. I was going to say one other thing about productivity as well, that recently ChatGPT has added a web search in the web interface, which means you can now easily search for the archives of all the different chats that you've had. So if you want to remind yourself of something that you maybe put in a week before, you can now easily find that. Whereas previously you'd have to sort of like go through the whole list, and maybe it would take you a long time, particularly if you're a power user, to find out exactly what the prompt was. Now that's been available for a while in the app version, the iOS and the Android official version from OpenAI, but I'm really glad to see that it's now part of the web version. But another thing that you could do with, say, the app version is the voice mode, or now if you're based in the UK and other places around the world, you can use the advanced mode, which is not available in the EU because it's against the EU laws to have any sort of AI voice which has emotion expressed, which I think is interesting. Maybe that could be used for phishing or for some sort of a nefarious activity. But certainly in the UK, you do get access now to what's called advanced voice mode, which means that you can ask the AI to speak in a certain accent or play a certain role. So if you're looking for ways in which you can use this for having a fantastic learning buddy or conversational partner, that's brilliant. But for a school to, if you like, actively promote the use of AI with students using a tool like ChatGPT because of the age restrictions, etc., that I've talked about, I think potentially that could be problematic. There are some teachers that are doing that. They're allowing their students to use ChatGPT in class, and people ask me about that. But of course, as a trainer or consultant, I need to make sure that I'm squeaky clean over what I'm suggesting. And I always say that everyone has to check the privacy policy and the terms and conditions of any tool they want to use in order to ensure that everyone is safe. But I think things are radically different now compared to, let's say, a few years ago. But it's the challenge is to try to keep up with everything. And that's why I think, again, having people like myself is going to really help with this sort of thing as a shortcut.
Yeah, the advanced voice mode is interesting. I had to play around with that the other day because I sort of use myself as a guinea pig sometimes. I'm a, rubbish language learner as well. I struggle with motivation and all the sort of things our students do that we chastise them for. So I had a quick play with that. And if anyone hasn't had a go with this, then this is, as you say, it's ChatGPT sort of, I don't know, putting its sort of more human face on, and you can talk to it like it's a person. You can choose your voice, and the idea is you can fall in love with it, create your own virtual friend, and in this case, teacher. It was great, really interesting. So I'm practicing my Polish, and this was grading its language to me as I was able to pick up and have conversations. I live in the UK, so it was nice to be able to have that on tap, I suppose. So I think that's an example of how the technology here can give you autonomy as a learner. This is an issue that you're going to run into is, getting authentic access to the target language you're trying to get to. We've got YouTube that can give us video, we've got audio, but the fact that, conversation on tap, that graded conversation is fantastic. Be interested to see what the impact is on language teaching in the industry. But to me, I think it's not a replacement for that, the social aspect, the motivational aspect that going to a class has. I think that's what I was angling at there a bit with the question, to see if you're going to get, what's the role of the classroom now and moving forward? And to me, it's sort of, I don't think it's changed that fundamentally. I think we've got these tools and they're great, but it doesn't change the fact that if you're a language learner, the process through which you go probably hasn't changed that much. You need, exposure, repetition, the recall, interleaved practice, and you need all those things. And of course, the production and the tasks. So, that's all just a, bit of waffly reflection, I suppose. But comment on that as you will. But what do you see as in addition to that? What do you see as being the future, the way things are going with language teaching and how AI integrates and hopefully adds something to it as well?
Well, I think that with the use of AI amongst students, I think what it's going to do is it's going to, for those that are using in a positive way, not just to complete their homework and not think about it, for example, that it's going to really, as you say, promote student agency and make them more independent, the way in which they can, as you say, practice conversations either with a tool like Mizou, or if they're allowed to use ChatGPT with voice mode or advanced voice mode, then I think that can be a fantastic way of being able to give them confidence and practice their speaking. I think that if they were to write a text, be it in a Google Doc or a Word document or on paper. They could easily download that as a PDF or take a photograph of it and upload it into ChatGPT and then ask it for feedback. I think to me that would be a really good use, obviously age permitting, for them to use AI in a very constructive way to give them feedback to improve their learning, so that they have, if you like, a virtual teacher with them 24/7. And there are, as we all know, there are some students who just cannot get enough of language learning, and they're just really keen and they want to try everything out and they want to create little quizzes for themselves and so on and so forth. And I think all the different pillars of language learning, of grammar, vocabulary, phonics, and what have you, AI can absolutely help with that to promote autonomy and free up more time, and to give those students who want to have that extra practice the opportunity to do so. So I can't see, certainly in the near future, practice changing that much. I think what will happen is that teachers, if they're going to adopt AI for the different reasons that I talked about, one of which, time, I think you've talked about that quite a lot, time, confidence, fear that they're going to get into trouble. I think that if they do adopt it, if they do dip their toes in the water more, then they will find that they can, with the right sort of crafted prompts, they can save a lot of time, they can create resources, lesson plans, etc. And then maybe they'll get a bit more confident, and then they'll use a tool like Magic School, maybe, which is referred to as a wrapper tool, whereby you have essentially ChatGPT in the background, but the interface is made to look as if it is more student friendly, because there is a Magic Student version of that, but then the Magic School version is aimed at teachers, and the way in which you can, for example, create a lesson plan, create a rubric, create a presentation. You can put in a prompt and generate a Google Slides presentation, for example. I think all those different things are really useful. And one of my favorite tools at the moment is TurboScribe. In fact, I was saying earlier, the only tool I pay for is the premium version of ChatGPT, because of the fact I'm using it literally on a daily basis. I've very recently, in the last couple of days, I've decided to pay for TurboScribe, the premium version, which, if people don't know, allow you to transcribe 3 files per day, be it audio or video files or YouTube clips, and each file can be up to 30 minutes in length. And so in the work that I do, listening to webinars, doing podcast interviews, etc., and so on and so forth, it's really easy now to create very accurate transcripts. And then once you've got the transcript, you can put that into, for example, ChatGPT, and generate a detailed summary for example, a Facebook post in my Facebook group, Language Teaching with AI. So I find that transcribing is something that I'm doing so often that I need to pay for the premium version, because the free version is not, even though it's very generous, is not enough for the needs that I have. And therefore, I think, again, working through your workflow, working out what you like to do or the best ways that you like to use AI, that's something which I found. And I think that with a tool like TurboScribe, the way in which you can create a transcript, you can edit it if there are any mistakes, you can download it as a Word document, you can choose the speech recognition options, officially known as speaker diarization, which you can then work out if there are different speakers in the same bit of audio. It does that naturally in TurboScribe very accurately, and then you can then download that as a Word document, use find and replace to replace speaker 1 with the name of the person or speaker 2 with the name of the person. And again, that's really useful if you're then going to generate a detailed summary of what people have said in, for example, a meeting or in a webinar. Sometimes I record my own webinars and then I put the audio into TurboScribe to generate the transcript, and then I can then write very quickly a very detailed ChatGPT produced summary. And that has really, really streamlined my workflow and has allowed me to write a huge number of posts, sometimes on a daily basis, in my Facebook group, and people have sort of really appreciated how comprehensive the texts are. And really, that's really down to accurate transcription. And as a result of that, you can then, if you like, give people what they want.
Nice. Yeah, I think it's definitely worth paying. There's a couple of I've bit the bullet and paid for. And it's just a word of like reassurance for anyone thinking about this. Like, yes, eventually, if you find things you like, is worth paying for the odd application AI-wise, because it does cost. But one word of reassurance is that I think most of them you can do on a monthly basis, cancel anytime, rejoin if you're not using it for a little bit. So it's they're fairly flexible. So trying one out for £10 a month, is an option, something that you can think about if there's something you see yourself using. So yeah, we're almost on the hour mark, Joe. We've covered quite a lot of ground. Is there anything that we haven't touched on that you wanted to flag quickly? Is there anything related to what you're doing at the moment that you'd like to just highlight?
Well, if people want to get in touch with me, I would really recommend that they request to join my Facebook group, Language Teaching with AI. That's a really good, one-stop shop, if you like, to find out some of the latest ideas, I would say, not trying to boast, but the latest ideas on the use of AI in language teaching. People can connect with me on Twitter X. I'm just at Joe Dale on Twitter X. I'm on LinkedIn as Joe Dale 100. I worked out recently how you can generate your own username, which is quite cool. Otherwise, it was a very long URL, which was you could never remember. So I'm just Joe Dale 100 on LinkedIn. My YouTube channel is youtube.com/@Joe Dale. Again, hours and hours and hours of content, which is freely available there. Those are a few places, but I think requesting to join the Facebook group Language Teaching with AI would be the first port of call. And of course, I would recommend, if people are interested, to come on this course that I've mentioned, again, called Language Teaching with AI. It's every Monday in November. And even if you've missed, for example, the first one, which I did on Monday of this week, 4 separate sessions of an hour and a half each, one at 9 o'clock in the morning, 12:30, 7 o'clock, 9:30 in the evening. So I was absolutely exhausted by the end of it. Then you can get the recordings of those either individually, or if you sign up for the whole series, then you get the recording, and then you can then choose to attend the other 3 live, or again, as people are very busy, as we've alluded to many times, then they can just wait to receive the recording, and I will email them the recording via the Eventbrite. So I'm sure we can put all of this content in the show notes, and then people can then find out and explore and get in touch with me as they see fit to find out more, and I can help them along this journey, as I've talked about already.
Nice one. Yeah, links below. Brilliant. Okay, Joe, well, thank you very much for your time. It's been awesome, and we'll see you at the next show.
Amazing. Thank you for the opportunity, Phil. It's been great to talk about all things AI and language teaching.
Nice one. We'll do it again. Cheers. Bye-bye.